Hello, this is Pastor Matthew Woods from Grace Lutheran Church in New Albany, Indiana. And this is the weekly devotion for April 22nd, 2024. Dennis Prager, radio show host and author of the Rational Bible, has a strong opinion about courage. It is in his Rational Bible, particularly his commentary on Exodus, he says, I am convinced courage is the rarest of all good traits. There are far more kind and honest people than there are courageous people. Unfortunately, however, in the battle against evil, all good traits in the world amount to little when not accompanied by courage. I would fully agree with that. I agree that courage is fundamentally critical if anything good is accomplished and evil is overcome. When I visit Acts chapter 4, we discover very different kinds of disciples than the ones on Easter morning who were locked behind the doors for fear of the Jews, namely, now disciples with courage. In Acts chapter 3, Peter and John heal a beggar over 40 years old and crippled from birth. It was his daily routine to go to the temple to beg, not to worship, but to beg. Now, Peter and John healed the beggar, and he immediately jumps up and starts following them and praising God for all the people to see. And he's dancing and glorifying God, and people are quick to notice this guy. Peter and John are quick to identify Jesus as the source of this man's healing when people start asking. They are also quick to speak of Jesus as the resurrected Savior, one raised from the dead. And it is by his power that this man is healed. Speaking so boldly in the temple gets the disciples arrested and thrown in jail for the night. They really don't know what to do with them. Enter now chapter 4. Peter and John and the former crippled man stand before the same men who crucified Jesus. Verses 5 and 6 reveal the political players by name. The next day, it says, the rulers and the elders and the teachers of the law met in Jerusalem. Annas, the high priest, was there, and so were Caiaphas, John, Alexander, and others of the high priest family. The list of names is notorious, right? Sadducees, members of the same family. The Sanhedrin was very nepotistic, as it seems. These men not only represented the aristocracy, but also the religious group that did not believe in the resurrection and hated Jesus, hated the message even more. Now they hate Jesus' disciples and especially their message because it's still about Jesus. They put Jesus to death on the cross, hoping he would go away, looking for a way to cancel him and shut it all down, but it's all backfired. No way they're going to silence these disciples either. This is where we take special notice today on courage. Acts chapter 4:13, we hear this. When they saw the courage of Peter and John, they realized that they were unschooled, ordinary men. They were astonished, and they took note that they had been with Jesus. Well, that's great. They took note that these men were with Jesus. Oh, God willing, people would note that about all of us. But it reveals that they have courage now that they did not hold before. Peter and John knew whom they followed and what Jesus had done for them and will do for them. The evidence was literally standing next to them, dancing around and praising God. It had to be a funny scene. These were not the same men, by the way, hiding again behind those locked doors on Easter morning, huddled in fear over these same men that they're standing before. But now they are so bold to witness here in Acts chapter 4. Peter and John were no longer afraid of what may happen to them, and boldly chose to follow Jesus rather than heed any threats or warnings about not to preach. In this one case, we see elements important to courage that we should all claim for ourselves. And that is, courage deals with the truth and the reality of Jesus' resurrection most of all. Fear only deals with possible scenarios and uncertainties, and such as the notion as these religious leaders somehow combing the streets looking for the disciples, which is what it never happened. Courage deals with the certainty and gets noticed and respected even by one's enemies. Now, we've seen it before in Daniel 3 with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They refused to bow to the golden statue, you remember. Verses 16 through 18 displays a bold faith. And I love what they answered to the king. Verse 16 says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve will deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, I love that, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. Don't you love that? Courage here says the idol isn't real and Nebuchadnezzar's power is limited, even if in the moment it seems so strong. Look what happens later with Daniel 6. It's Daniel's turn. Daniel was set up by other leaders who were jealous of Daniel's position before the king. He was effectively the king's favorite. They didn't like that. And they didn't like that he was Jewish. These leaders convinced the king to make a law where all Persian citizens and people under their rule, under the king's rule, could only worship the king for the next 30 days. They knew Daniel would not abide by this decree. They thought they had him. The plan didn't faze Daniel, who went on and prayed as he did every day with the windows open. And as a group, they went and found him. And of course, they accused him of breaking the law. So he was hauled before the king, and the king was bound by his own law and had to throw Daniel into the lion's den. An angel shut the mouths of the lions and saved Daniel, much to the king's relief. But it's the courage that got him through that. In all these examples, these men remained bold in the faith. In each case, the followers of God were ready to give their lives. Any man willing to sacrifice himself for the cause is hard to stop. Their courage developed from what? From a deep communion with God, an interaction and a worship and a prayer life that was deeply rooted in God. Each one was willing only to worship God and serve him only. Oh, to have such a communion with God that nothing could make us afraid. What we should come to realize is that the devil also has no new tricks. He will threaten God's people. He will try to silence them in fear, take all of their stuff away from them. There will always be someone trying to outwit and shut down the church. Always. Courage that is founded in a deep communion with God drives away fear. It doesn't necessarily avoid the fiery furnaces or the lion's den or even abuse from the religious leaders, but it does have guts to say, even if our Lord does not save us from you, we want you to know they will not serve your stupid idols or buckle to your evil ways. Have at it. Courage is the ability to stand your ground, refusing to stop even if you're wounded. Courage is inspired by whom we are associated with, namely the resurrected Jesus. Peter and John were no longer afraid of evil men because these same evil men couldn't stop Jesus the first time from rising. The contrast is stark. On the one hand, Jesus is resurrected from the dead. On the other hand, these are a bunch of rich, entitled men who thought they could outsmart God, but failed miserably. They failed again with Peter and John. The message of Jesus is what gives us courage then and now, and it gives us courage today in this culture that we live in as well. The circumstances haven't really changed, but neither has the source of our courage and the reason to believe. The most powerful part of courage is how it focuses on purpose. In 2016, Hacksaw Ridge came out, the movie about Private Desmond Doss. He was a pacifist, Seventh-day Adventist who saw himself serving God as a medic in World War II. Now, many called him a coward because he wouldn't pick up a gun, and he endured all kinds of moments of cruel and unfair treatment. He even faced potential dismissal from the military itself, but he eventually won the right to serve without carrying a gun. His courage was proven in the Battle of Okinawa. In one of the worst fights that the Allies ever had, were forced into retreat, leaving behind many wounded and many casualties. Doss remained behind. Throughout the night, under the cover of darkness, Private Doss roamed the battlefield searching for survivors among the carnage of bodies and craters. He crawled around, careful not to get caught by the Japanese soldiers who were still wandering about trying to finish off the wounded. When he would find a wounded man, Doss would drag him to the cliff that they'd climbed up from to begin with, and he would lower them down the safety where medics at the bottom could get them to the hospital. By the time he was done, he saved 75 soldiers. The line made famous in the movie was what Doss would say when he'd find a soldier, get him to safety, and then start over. He would say, "Lord, give me one more, just one more." His courage was motivated by a trust in the Lord, and that's the point. He was in a hostile place, willing to give his life, surrounded by those who would wanted to kill him. This is a picture of courage. Although Doss wasn't saving men for this purpose, he would eventually go on to earn the Medal of Honor for his actions at Okinawa. Courage, by any account, is always admired and gets noticed by the faithful and the unfaithful alike. Courage makes us respectable and powerful. But the last aspect of courage is its impact. Courage will always bring attention to the person who exercises that courage. However, that person will likely use that courage to highlight a message or a purpose greater than himself. And that's where Peter and John come in. Now, Doss's message was Jesus in the gospel. Peter and John's message was Jesus in the gospel, the resurrected Lord. The three men in the fiery furnace was God, the God of Israel, is the only true God. And for Daniel, the message was that God, the God of Israel alone, is worthy of worship. A faith that has courage is an unstoppable faith. This combo will inspire and transform the landscape wherever it is exercised. May the Lord give us courage to believe and boldness to proclaim it like Peter and John. The Lord be with you. Thanks for being with me this week, and I appreciate your time with me. I look forward to seeing you next time. In the meantime, the Lord bless you with his courage. Take care. Bye-bye.